Okay, got a connection. Ready to go in a couple of minutes. Weather is really crappy here today. Pile of wet snow. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So today we're speaking about the last of the energizing factors. Just to recap, we're doing the 7 bojjhangas, the enlightenment factors, and 3 of them are energizing and 3 of them are calming or tranquilizing. And the part of the practice or the skill in practice is to balance these, to encourage the energizing factors when the mind is dull, and to encourage the calming factors when the mind is agitated. And so far we've dealt with sati, which is the one factor in the middle that's required in all circumstances. That's mindfulness. And the first 2 energizing factors, which were investigation of dhammas, dhamma vichaya, and energy, virya. So today we're going to talk about Pīti, which is translated as happiness or as rapture. Different people prefer different translations here. Pīti is a form of happiness. Sometimes it's also translated joy. And I think this is an important point right off the bat, that joy is an enlightenment factor. This is something to remember when you begin to think that the teachings can be sound kind of grim at times, all the emphasis on suffering and death and so on. But that's just the half of the teaching that tells us to look realistically at the situation in samsara. But being gloomy or sad is always associated with unskillful mind states. Well, there's no spiritual benefit in being sad, but there is a benefit to be gained from being joyful. So Pīti, besides being a bojjhanga, an enlightenment factor, it's also one of the factors of first and second jhana. And in that context, it's spoken about and defined a bit more precisely. But when it should be remembered that when a factor is a component of jhana, it may be experienced somewhat differently than it is outside of that context. We see this with vitakka vichara, mental application and sustaining attention to a thought. Vitakka vichara in the jhana factors relate to how one holds or relates to the object. In ordinary consciousness, these are the energies behind cognitive thought and speech. So it is with Pīti as a jhana factor. It refers to that energizing joyfulness of the mind that accompanies samadhi, and is said to be born of seclusion, which means that when one is secluded from the sense sphere, then there's a natural upwelling of this joyfulness. I think the best way to think about the jhanas is not so much gaining new factors, but the falling away of old encumbrances or hindrances that allow the mind to express itself more naturally. And the mind has this natural joyfulness that's suppressed by the engagement in the sense desire realm. We get caught up in things. When the mind is simplified to that degree, as it is in jhana, then its natural state is more expressed. It comes out as not held back, and this is felt as joyfulness. Another jhana factor closely associated with Pīti is sukha, which is usually translated bliss. And the Visuddhimagga, to clarify the difference between Pīti and sukha, gives a simile. It says that if a man is lost in the desert and he sees up ahead an oasis, he sees palm trees and water, then he'll feel happiness in his mind. That's Pīti. But when he actually reaches the oasis and he's sitting in the shade and enjoying a cool drink of water, then he experiences bliss or sukha. And it's also said that Pīti is to be classed in the sankharas, a mental formation, whereas sukha is classed as a vedana or feeling. So they're distinguished from one another quite clearly. Another difference between the two that's perhaps the most directly relevant to experience is that Pīti has various physical associated states. Like it's experienced in the body. This is to be clear. Pīti is in itself, it is a mental state. It's not a bodily state, but it does have an effect on the body, and the body experiences sensations related to Pīti. And I'll return to that in a moment. But just to clarify, in the case of sukha, there is no particular physical affect associated other than a sense of ease and well-being in the body. The physical associations with Pīti are many and varied, and they'll be experienced by meditators in different ways. Common ones are like goosebumps or tingling or spine rushes. It's really a wide range of physical expressions, there's some kind of energy moving in the body. In the Visuddhimagga, they in the section on Pīti, they or Buddhaghosa speaks of 5 degrees of Pīti, beginning with minor Pīti, which he says is causes the hairs to rise on the body. So this would be like goosebumps or tingling, minor sensations in the body. Then the next one is, let me see, I'm going to miss one. I'm just going to refer to the text here. Yeah, I was going to miss one. Momentary Pīti, which is felt like flashes. It's not a steady sensation. It's a kind of momentary rush. And showering Pīti is the third, which comes in waves. So this might be like a spine rush or just like a wave passing through the body. Then the fourth is what's called uplifting Pīti. And this is a sensation of the body being very light and buoyant. And it's experienced as a subjective sense of floating. According to the Visuddhimagga, it can actually manifest as actual physical levitation. Be that as it may, it certainly subjectively feels very, very strongly like you're floating. And then the fifth, according to this list, the fifth and highest kind of Pīti is inundating Pīti, which is a massive kind of rush, and it's compared to a flood filling up a canyon. And this raises a kind of an interesting point that I think might be of some importance. In a few places in the canon, when the Buddha is speaking about the jhana factors, for second jhana, which is that jhana which is most associated with Pīti, it's the strongest in second jhana. He compares the sensation to a mountain pool that has no streams running into it, and it never receives any rain, but is continually refreshed by a strong underground spring. So this again the comparison with rushing water. And subjectively, it can feel very much like that. I think that, particularly taken from this simile, I think that Pīti may be, if it's not exactly the same, it may be very closely related to what in other traditions are called Kundalini, or in yet another tradition, chi energy. It's some kind of energetic movement in the body that occurs associated with Pīti. And it's certainly very pleasant. It's also, I think, very healthy and healing. So it's something to certainly be aware of when it occurs, and not to attach to it, not to become obsessed with it. Be aware of it. Certainly don't try and block it, but also don't don't become too enamored with it, because it is, in one sense, it's a phase. Pīti gives way to sukha, which is a higher, more refined condition. But I think, as to return to the theme here, as a bojjhanga, we're not focusing as much on the physical correlates. They may not be as intense as when one is developing samadhi, but on the mental aspect, pīti as a sankhara, as a mental state, which is joyfulness, which has a natural, being joyful has a natural energizing effect on the mind. When the mind is devoid of joy, if the mind is sad or depressed, there's a lack of energy. Joyfulness makes us buoyant. It has a naturally inherent activity associated with it. The mind is bright. So joyfulness is certainly something to be fostered and encouraged. Joy also, as a feeling, joy has the effect of being a karma intensifier, meaning that any act for good or ill that's done joyfully has more karmic weight than one that is done with a neutral or negative mind. So taken together with the other energizing factors, we have investigation of states, G and joy. These tranquilizing states, they will result in agitation and restlessness. So we need that factor in the middle, sati, to be aware of the state of mind, of which side to work on. And all these three factors, the three energizing factors, they work together in harmony. If you're energetic, you're going to be joyful. There's a joyfulness in being energetic, and you're going to naturally want to explore and investigate. And if you start investigating, that will energize you. The mind is then engaged in a process, and it's inherently a joyful one. And this rousing joy in the mind brings forth energy, and it gives you the potential to do investigation. Okay, so I'm seeing in the chat that some people are saying that the sound is glitching. I think the internet connection is not real good today because we're having very crappy weather here. There's a wet snowstorm going on right now, and that's interfering with my satellite upload. I get the occasional flashes, the message from YouTube that my connection is unstable. So I think I've pretty well said what I need to say about Pīti, and I'll stay on and answer questions for a while and see what happens if the internet stays up for me. Demarwaro says he's hearing me well from Germany. Here's a question here. In my experience, constricting certain areas in the base of the spine in the middle of the head sends a pleasant electrical surge through the body, which are similar to, waiting for the conclusion of that. Okay, I don't know, that may have, he's either not finished or it's crapped out, but I think I get the gist of what he's asking here. There, as I said, there is a mental aspect and a physical aspect to Pīti, and the two are coordinated. And in our Buddhist practice, we emphasize primarily the mental side, and that will naturally bring forward some of these physical effects. But there are other yogic practices where you start with the physical side, and that will you deliberately induce through various techniques the physical sensations associated with Pīti, and that will then react on the mental aspect and bring forth mental happiness. So you can approach it from either side. How does one actually raise Pīti outside of samadhi? Generally, it's to encourage a kind of optimistic, joyful outlook, to be, we start with a realistic appraisal of samsara, but we don't let ourselves be depressed or downcast by that. To be open to feelings of happiness when they arise, encourage them. Right? No, it is possible to live more joyfully, to encourage joyfulness. Things like being in nature, enjoying the natural environment can raise wholesome feelings of joy. Being at ease and keeping the precepts and being moral and ethical is also encourages joyfulness, because you then have no regrets and remorse. Can you elaborate on the distinction between Pīti and Sukha? As you said, it is a mental formation with bodily manifestation. Sukha seems more mental than bodily, but I'm still not sure. Yes, well, the technical distinction, as defined in the Abhidhamma and in the Visuddhimagga, is that Pīti is a mental formation, a sankhara, and Sukha is a vedana, a feeling. And Sukha will always be present when Pīti is present, but not the reverse. You can have Sukha without Pīti, but you can't have Pīti without Sukha. So Pīti is the kind of the concept of happiness, brightness, joyfulness. It's the mental attitude, let's say. Whereas Sukha is the feeling. It's an emotion. There's an emotional sense of happiness, peacefulness. Bliss is actually a pretty good translation, although it does have the downside of being maybe too exaggerated for mild forms of Sukha. I mean, if you just feel pleasantly happy, you've got Pīti and Sukha both working together, but most people wouldn't call that being having bliss. Sukha doesn't have any real immediate or physical association, except, as I said, that you feel completely at ease. When sukha is strong, the body feels no stress. It just feels completely at ease, but it's not thrilling as piti can be. Piti can has a kind of emotion inherent in it, whereas sukha is stillness. Another analogy is the radiance of the Brahma gods, the Abhasara gods of the second jhana level. Their radiance flickers like a torch. That's piti. As the radiance of the Subhakina deities of the third jhana level is steady like the moon. How does the process of rebirth from dying to fertilized egg to embryo to an infant in a new unknown world feel from the perspective of a wise, partially enlightened being, mindfully watching the whole process? Well, very few beings are in that situation to be mindfully watching the whole process, although it does occur on very rare occasions, like the case of the Bodhisattva when he was born. It was said he was reborn satimant, that is, with mindfulness, and he had a continuity of consciousness from through that process. There's no real description of, no account of how he felt about it, how he subjectively experienced that. I think for the ordinary person who's not satiman, that is, the great majority of us, we're reborn. The experience of death and the transition and rebirth, process of being an embryo, it's so traumatic and overwhelming that all the memories are lost, and it must be very confusing. One thing to note is that the experience of an embryo prior to birth, we do know from after a certain stage of development that they actually have dreams, because they can see the brainwave patterns associated with REM sleep. Now, that's been proven experimentally that embryos dream, so we have to wonder what they dream about. And there has been, I think in Western psychological discourse, there's a bias to seeing the experience of an embryo as being blissful, and this is seen by some schools of psychology, at least, it's seen as the big trauma is birth, when you're ripped from this peaceful oceanic state, floating around in the womb, and you're brought to the harsh, cold light of the outer world. But we find a completely different picture, and there's a passage in the Visuddhimagga talking about the birth process, and it talks about the experience of the embryo as being very unpleasant. The embryo is cramped and hot, and is subject to all kinds of buffeting around, and is in a state of deep confusion. So I don't think we can't assume that the state of the embryo is a blissful one. We don't, it'd be very hard for us to know. It is another point I would make about this is that there are plenty of anecdotal accounts of very young children like, in the first 2-3 years of life, that have memories of previous lifetimes, and will say to their parents something like, when I used to be a airplane pilot. Parents often just write down fantasizing, but there may be something more to it. Okay. When one is feeling low and down for no apparent reason, the almost opposite of Pīti, how does one change the course of that negative emotion? Yeah, that's an important question. When there is a down state in the mind, even up to the point of depression, it's like a heavy weight on the mind, and the mind is being suffocated in a kind of darkness. And there's no benefit to it. There's no spiritual benefit in being sad or depressed. You need to try and get out of it. Now, it's not easy because it's you're caught in that. One way of dealing with it that is to you can't maybe not directly raise the Pīti factor, but try and raise the energy factor and be active. Even if just going for walks or doing some strenuous activity. And also it's been seen by Ajahn is service to others. Not just making a donation. Not just making a donation someplace, but physically putting yourself out there with your body, doing your chores, whatever it might be. If you're doing something not without a direct immediate benefit to yourself, but actively helping others, that is a strong counter to depression. Because one of the aspects of depression is that it's a very self-centered state of mind. It's like the whole universe is contracted to poor me, and you want to get out of that. I have a question. One time I was meditating, lying down, on my leg began to feel really good. I asked my Buddhist friends, and they said I was in the ballpark of Upachara Samadhi. I don't know. That could be a manifestation of Pīti. In my experience, it's not so much in the that it would occur in one limb like that, but who knows? I mean, there's such a great deal of individual variation in Pīti that it quite possibly was. What do you think of numerology? Yeah, no, I don't know anything about numerology. I don't want to comment on that. I've never taken an interest in it. How does one outgrow the need for approval and praise? Well, when you get approval and praise, pretty shortly afterwards, you'll probably get the blame and disparagement. They seem to come one after the other. Don't take either one too seriously. When you do receive praise, try and not let it affect your even keel. Try to have an equanimity about it. And the same when you're attacked, when you're called down, try and maintain that equanimity. Or this is what they call the Lokiya dhammas, the worldly dhammas. And if you attach to praise and blame, a life becomes like a vicious roller coaster ride. you're really happy when someone praises you, and then you're really sad when they criticize you. But if you find that middle ground, you just take it in stride, then you're not obsessed with it, or value it, or even want it. You just carry on. Can Pīti be experienced as perception of inner light or inner sound? No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that those things could bring on Pīti. You can take those as meditation objects, either a visualization of light or the inner sound, but then in themselves are not Pīti, although they might induce Pīti. The experience of Bhanga Jnana is described in the Goenka retreat. Does this relate at all to the topic of discussion here? I can't really answer that because I'm not sure what Goenka means by Bhanga Jnana. He has quite his own system, and I've not really studied it. Can we send metta towards inanimate objects or sensations? I've heard Ajahn Jeff saying, have metta for your breath. Yeah, I'm kind of not really a fan of that approach. I don't see metta as being directed towards inanimate objects or processes like the breath, as really being, I know certainly couldn't do any harm, but it's not really the definition of metta as I understand it, which is, may you be well and happy. How do you wish an inanimate object to be well and happy? Or a process like the breath. The person breathing, you want them to be well and happy, but the breath itself is just a partial aspect of that whole being. Can you please give some concrete exercises in developing this equanimity when you get to the seventh factor here? Yes, y'all. Thank you. Well, that is coming. So, how do I spread Pīti around the body like an attendant preparing bath powder with water, like it says in the sutta? This is, I told you the analogy for second jhana is like the underground stream filling up the lake. The analogy for first jhana is that the feeling of happiness or well-being pervades the whole body, like water pervades the bath powder, which I think, it's a little bit obscure, but in ancient India, rather than bar soap, they would have a powder that they would mix with water and, knead it and make a gooey mass to wash with. And the water pervades the whole ball of the soap, just as Pīti pervades the whole body. So it's felt in the body as a joyfulness that throughout the whole body. And this is much milder form than in second jhana, right, which has that uprushing quality. But it is interesting that, and I think there's some to be contemplated here, the first three jhanas, the analogy is something to do with water. In the third jhana, the analogy is for sukha is a lotus growing in the pond that never breaks the surface, so it's pervaded all around, in and out by the water. It's only in the fourth jhana, which does not have Pīti and sukha, that the analogy is not based on water, but it's said to be like a man sitting with a fine cloth thrown over him. It's so fine that it clings to all his form. And that's compared to equanimity. So this association with liquid water is also another reason that I find a similarity to the idea of Kundalini, because it's kind of an uprushing sensation. And as the questioner was really asking, how do you induce that? It's not so much that you deliberately inducing it, but that it should occur with samadhi. When the mind is unified and is divorced from the sense pleasures, then it finds this internal pleasure that is experienced in the whole body. How do you break a cycle of negative thought, emotion, anxiety? In my experience, it happens so quickly, it's hard to intervene in time. That's practice. You have to, this is the value of doing, some methodical insight practice, to observe the process in the state of detachment and calm. When you're on your cushion in a quiet place, you're not distracted, you observe the process going on in the mind. That's a lot easier than in the middle of a busy day. If some things are going on and you get triggered and you go into this negative cycle. But if you've trained yourself in meditation to observe that, then it becomes possible to observe it happening in daily life. When some situation pushes your buttons, you can notice it and break it before, because you now have some insight into it. You don't have to be taken for a ride by those states. You don't have to be taken for a ride by those states. So I think that we're kind of slowing down here, and maybe I shouldn't push our luck too much, because the internet is kind of dodgy today. And we'll come back next week. Hopefully, I've got a better connection, and we're starting on the 3 tranquilizing factors next week. So may you all be well and happy. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time.